Welcome to the Journalism and Publishing panel. I am Kathy Anderson. I'm the program director for Chicago Careers in Journalism. And if you want to talk afterwards or get a card or whatever, I'll just be around. I'd like to introduce a moderator of our panel, Bob Levy, Bob is fabulous. Bob has been coming to Taking the Next Step for the last 15 years. He was one of the alums who helped create this fabulous event. Bob is a former reporter and columnist for the Washington Post. He did a column every single day for 24 years. And his column was ranked best column in Washington, D.C. 9 different times. So, Bob Levy.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be with you, and I'm delighted to say that I have escaped mental hospitals for coming back to Chicago 15 consecutive times in January, a record that I hope to continue unbroken. We have a terrific panel for you this year, but it will be as terrific as you make it, and that is my not-so-subtle hint for all of you to ask all questions that you have once we have gone in order, 5 minutes per, to tell you who each of us is, who each of us was, and how each of us got here from our days at the University of Chicago. That means that no question is too small, no question is too dopey, and no question will be received with anything but open arms. So please ask us. And once we're done, please ask us for business cards and other contact information and other help. Our idea, and Kathy's, is that today's session is the gift that keeps on giving. It does not end at 4:15 clunk. We will be here for you for the next, depending on which class you're in, 2 years, 1 year, whatever you need for perpetual help, we will give you. I want to go one at a time. We're each going to take about 5 minutes, and we are all from different points of the star in this media galaxy. And our stories, both at the university and since, are very, very different. I hope you'll identify with at least one of us, and I hope that we can help shape your attitudes toward this absolutely tremendous business that in some way or another all of us fell in love with when we were you. Yes, we were 20 once. Yes, we were. And some of us try to remember that all the time. For some of us, it gets a little harder. Anyway, sir, please start.
Hi, I'm Peter Hubbard, and I'm graduated from Chicago in 2001. And my path is that I grew up in Washington, D.C., and came to the U of C and worked in I loved books. I loved everything about it, but it never occurred to me who actually created these books and how did they come about and how do they hit your bookstores and library shelves. And incidentally, I worked in the library for 3 years stacking books. And I had a great curiosity for a whole broad range of stuff, but I just didn't know exactly what I wanted to do at the end of the day. And I did a master's degree at Columbia and moved to New York, and was totally unemployable anywhere else other than in book publishing, and luckily that's where I ended up. I did an internship at Routledge Press, then was lucky enough through a friend to find an opening at HarperCollins under an editor named Henry Ferris, who was a great nonfiction editor. He had edited Barack Obama's Dreams of My Father, and he really took me under his wing and allowed me to edit some of his manuscripts and eventually acquire more books. And now I'm a senior editor at HarperCollins, and I've stayed there for 8 years, and that's somewhat unusual to stay at the same place for that whole time. I do mostly nonfiction books. Some of the first projects I worked on were just using actually some of my U of C education, repackaging old philosophy books. So Harper had an amazing catalog of Heidegger and Wittgenstein and Freud, but they had never been repackaged in 30 years. And some of the covers were actually pretty cool, but they were totally dated. And so what I did is I said, these are all great. I mean, they're obviously still selling. They're still in print. Not at a very high level, but I brought them all together under a single imprint called Harper Perennial Modern Thought, repackaged them in really cool graphic covers, got some new introductions from contemporary scholars, and gave new life to all these books. And we've continued doing them, a couple more every year, and adding new titles and commissioning new translations. And then, at a big house like HarperCollins, you have to, at the end of the day, be making money. And that was something foreign to me. But you slowly get the hang out of it. And today I do a whole range of books from pop science. I have a book with a physicist named Brian Cox, who wrote a book called Wonders of the Universe, which was on the Colbert Report last year. I have a book on complexity theory coming up this year. I have a book, I'm doing Bear Grylls, the Man vs. Wild Stars memoir in May. And then right now I have this book called American Sniper, which is the #1 best-selling book in the world right now. It's #1 on Amazon and everywhere. And it's the autobiography of a Navy SEAL sniper who has killed more people than anyone in history. And it's really actually a fascinating guy, and it's just touched nerves. So it's been interesting to watch. And actually we can talk about maybe later some of the things that are happening with ebooks on that, because it's proved to be a huge component of the sales there. So anyways, that's me.
I'm Hank Sarton. I'm a senior editor at Time Out Chicago magazine. What that means, because I realize that's kind of an amorphous term, particularly in magazines, I oversee a number of sections. So I am the person next in line above section editors for books, music, what else do I oversee? Comedy, the gay and lesbian section. So I am the next set of eyes above section editors. They are writing or editing material for the section, and then I see it the next line up. I'm supposed to be a set of eyes that asks the question, would an audience outside your field but still interested understand what you just wrote? So it's always a challenge with the music people to try and convince them that sometimes you have to explain what the sub genres are of various music genres. The way I got where I am is kind of a strange path. I was a PhD student in film studies at the University of Chicago, and I sort of fell backwards into journalism. I was working on a dissertation on Warner Brothers cartoons, and a friend of mine knew an editor at a newspaper and mentioned, I know this guy and he's kind of funny and he's writing about cartoons, maybe he could do something for you. So I actually got solicited to write a piece. The key piece of advice that I can give anyone who ever gets an opportunity, anyone gives you an assignment of any kind, I did 3 crucial things. 1, I followed the assignment, which included the word count. Journalists are habitual overwriters, but he said, give me 600 words, and I gave him 600 words, not 1,100. The second thing I did was I filed it clean, clear, well-written copy that had been gone over with a fine-tooth comb to make sure I wasn't giving him something full of errors, and I submitted it on time. And the third thing, I did follow-up. When it appeared in print, I sent him a note and I said, it was a thrill, I'm so happy to see it in print. If there are any opportunities in the future, I hope you'll keep me in mind. All of that put him in a good mind to work with me because I was easy to work with. So 2 weeks later, he called me and said, I have another assignment, would you be interested? I, of course, said yes. I was a poor graduate student at the time, and even though the checks were small, they were helpful. And did the same routine, followed the assignment, did it on time, followed up afterwards. A month later, by a happy coincidence, they had an opening for a film critic. And he said, you know, you're getting a PhD in film studies. I bet you know a lot about that. Would you be interested in being our film critic? I had no training in writing journalism of any kind. I've never taken a journalism class, but I took it on. And I worked for 5 years as the house film critic for that newspaper. After I finished my PhD, I spent a year teaching, concluded that I was having the Robert Frost two roads diverged in a yellow wood moment, and I took the one less traveled by, I guess, and left academia and came back to Chicago where all of my journalism contacts were, and lucked into another position where I was the house critic for another newspaper for 5 years. Neither of those was a full-time position. I was working on a per-piece basis, but I was building a reputation around town. I got contacted by people at the Chicago Tribune. I wrote a few pieces for them. I did a number, hundreds actually, of reviews for the Chicago Reader, because they look around, editors look around and say, who's writing around town that we could use? So a combination of my own networking and then also my being out there in the field made me visible. When Time Out Chicago started, that was 7 years ago, I was asked to do some freelance work for them. I got a weekly column with them, and that put me in a good position when somebody left the organization a few months in to move back to New York, as it turned out. So they hired me on, and I became the film editor. I was the film section editor and a film critic for 6 years until the beginning of 2011. So then I moved up, and I've taken on a different set of responsibilities. And so we can certainly talk about kind of how to make those steps, because some of those steps for me were pure luck, and others were I knew how to play tricks like the follow-up note. So those are just some things on my mind right now. So thanks.
My name's Jenny Gavax. I'm with the University of Chicago Press, and I'm an assistant editor there in the reference department, which means that I work with the manual of style, if any of you guys have come across that. That's obviously our main book, but we also work with the Turabian manuals and some of the large sets of reference, as well as some new smaller books. We've done recently a book called Storycraft that's a lot, it's just a one-volume, first-person, very easy to read kind of book about the way to structure narrative, nonfiction narrative, be it journalism, be it memoir, be it, some kind of reportage. So that's where I am now. My story is a little bit like Hank's in that I had some Robert Frost moments as well. I had a couple, actually. I started out very, very determined to be in journalism. It was something that my parents were very much encouraging, because back then it was a very practical way to go and a route to a good career. Nobody saw 2008 coming. And so I was very set on being a journalist. I went to Northwestern undergraduate. I went through their journalism program there. I also picked up a second major in psychology because I find people very interesting. And had every single summer, I had an internship at a magazine where I was writing and getting clips and good experience and networking and all of that kind of thing. Graduated from Northwestern in 2000. Realized that I really needed to move to New York if I was going to work in magazines. And at that time, I knew I wanted to work with long-form writing. And magazines are obviously the longest form you can get in the journalism world. So I moved to New York. I was working for House and Garden magazine, which is now closed down. I don't know if any of you guys know it, but it was one of the Condé Nast magazines, same building as GQ, New Yorker, Vanity Fair, Vogue, all that thing. So that was kind of a heady place to be, first thing out of college. It was very interesting. But after a year and a half, I really was strongly realizing that I needed to not be in journalism. I needed to be working with books. I had a short gig working in book scouting, which is sort of a subgenre of book publishing that if anybody's interested in this, you can talk to me about it later, but it has to do with foreign rights and foreign publishing and translations, which is an interesting place to be, but it's sort of a subgenre, so I won't talk about that too much right now. Anyway, that was great. It lasted for a little bit, and I had my sort of Devil Wears Prada moment with a difficult boss. So that's also something that if anybody wants to ask about what to do about difficult work situations, I would be happy to answer those questions because you're going to run into them. They happen, and there are ways to deal with them, and everyone has a story. So it's okay to have a difficult boss. Anyway, that was when I decided, gee, it was a good moment to reassess my career and maybe go back to graduate school and really get some in-depth textual training. So that was when I went to University of Chicago to their humanities program, their Master of Art in Humanities, the MAPH program. It was fabulous. I loved it. I was able to take some really rigorous, wonderful classes with some of the best professors on campus. I'm sure some of you guys have had that opportunity as well. And after that, I did have a Robert Frost moment. This was sort of my, I guess, second Robert Frost moment because I was looking around for publishing jobs in Chicago, and most of the publishing that is here in Chicago, as far as books is concerned anyway, it has to do with textbooks. And when I say textbooks, it's the kind of stuff for grade school and high school. So that's a really different world than HarperCollins or the press. And I had an opportunity to go to France and teach English and sort of just by step, just get out of my place of decision for a while, because I was also considering maybe I should get a PhD. So I ran away to France. I taught English for 2 years. It was lovely. I ate a lot of cheese. And I realized that no, I really wanted to be in Chicago, and B, I wanted to be in book publishing in Chicago, so no matter what it took, I was going to find a job in book publishing in Chicago, point blank. So I launched quite a networking campaign when I got back and crashed on a lot of friends' couches, just pulled out all the stops, everything I could think of. So if people want ideas about job searching, I could probably come up with 1 or 2 ideas from that period. I was able to land a job at the Northwestern University Press, which was, as it turns out, perfect for me. It's great for me to be in the university press world, which is slightly different from the trade publishing world that Peter's in. University press publishing is mostly for scholars and reference books. It's largely nonfiction, although Northwestern does have a poetry and fiction list. But I worked there for about 2.5 years. I acquired books in journalism, so I was able to go back to my roots, work with some of my old professors from Medill, and keep up with what was happening in the journalism world. Then I moved to University of Chicago Press it's been a little over a year now, to the reference department where I am now. And that also reminds me that if people want to talk about ebooks, we are doing some things with ebooks right now. I can talk about that. We're also doing some things with books that sort of become apps, and books that also sort of become websites or databases, or there are different words for it. So that's something that we could talk about as well, if you would like.
Thank you. Hi again. I'm Bob Levy, class of 1966, and it is a great pleasure to be a delegate to this meeting from the early part of the 20th century. It's always amazing to come back to Chicago and to the university and to see how much it's changed, and then to look at you and to see how little it has changed. Because you're about to hear from one of the great flag-waving optimists about the heritage media whom you will ever meet. The heritage media are daily newspapers, radio journalism, and television journalism, and I have spent my life in all 3. I've also dabbled in books. I was on the original staff of WashingtonPost.com, then and now one of the leading news and information websites in the world. I've taught journalism at 5 major research universities, partridges, pear trees. I have done everything there is to do in journalism. My major career was at the Washington Post, where I was on staff for almost 37 years. And for the final 2/3 of that time, as Kathy mentioned, I wrote a daily column about life in the city of Washington, ground level life. And I wrote 5,411 columns on deadline, and apparently I am still alive. There are days that I wonder how. I think my life and my career are a testament not only to the values of the University of Chicago that taught me not to be afraid of things I didn't know anything about, but also a testament to the power of endless coffee. I have been married to the same woman for almost 35 years, and I have lied to her in that time about exactly one thing, and that is how much coffee I drink every day. She thinks the over-under is 2 cups. It's more like 5, and on a bad day it could go higher. So the first lesson I want you all to learn is that coffee is your friend. That it will see you through good times and bad, it will see you through fallow times, and it will certainly get your blood going when deadline is upon you. I got to the Washington Post through sheer luck, and I will tell you an abbreviated version of the story. I started at the University of Chicago on the Maroon, as so many of you, I assume, are now doing. I recommend that to all of you who are not doing it. It will give you the 3 ways at a life in journalism, and those ways depend on being a better reporter, being a better interviewer, and attacking your weaknesses as a writer, and doing it early and doing it a lot. And if you want to do this business, you are going to need to make consistent and constant headway in all 3 of those areas. I do it even at my stage, and I'm almost 50 years out of the University of Chicago. More pretty soon. So this is where your education really helps you and your skills really help you. You could not get to or through the University of Chicago if you don't have the same skills that would allow you to pursue a career in journalism. And those skills are real talent with words, real talent with diligence and rigor. I was delighted to hear John Boyer use that word during his comments at lunch because that is the quintessential University of Chicago word. And to my mind, it's the quintessential word about good journalism. I'm sure that we will have a lot to say later in the program about where journalism is going, and man, do I have a lot to say about that. But where I hope you will go with the idea of journalism and with your careers in it is toward rigorous journalism, and not toward cheapy 140 character journalism, which anybody can do. You're better, you can do better. I started at the Maroon. I spent 2 years as the editor-in-chief. I hate to tell this story to young people because this is what life was like in 1966, but it dawned on me as a senior at the University of Chicago that I really probably ought to get a job. So I went to Harper Library, at the time the only library, pulled down the editor and publisher yearbook, wrote down, before apples, wrote down the names and addresses of the 100 largest newspapers in America and wrote to every one of these people. And I said, hi there, you should hire me because I'm the editor of a student newspaper at a school you may have heard of. You know, none of this torture that you guys go through about, 86 characters on your resume, and should the resume be on orange paper? You know, nothing like that. Handwritten letters. I got 34 job offers without any interviews whatsoever. Do not jump to congratulate me because I had many things going for me. One was that I knew I was not going to qualify for service in the armed forces thanks to a football injury. That was one. 2, there were almost no women in the newspaper business, even at that time. This is not all that long ago, but there were almost none. And 3, there were 3 times as many daily newspapers being published in America then as there are now. So I rolled the dice and I said, I'm going to go and have a European experience. I will work at a newspaper in a place where I have never been. So I shipped out to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I spent 1 year as a general assignment reporter on the Albuquerque Tribune. May it live on in memory, because it ain't living on in any other way. There I was a classic police reporter, covered everything under the sun, and got very lucky and got hired at the age of 22 by the legendary Ben Bradley at the Washington Post. And here's how that happened. This is how crazy fluky this can be. Then and now, I've been a very serious bridge player. I'm a national champion at bridge. I play bridge professionally a lot. And then I thought I was pretty good. I wasn't as good as I think I am now, but I was flying from Albuquerque to Washington for this job interview, and I couldn't find a place to park in the Albuquerque airport, and I had 5 minutes to buy something in the newsstand at the Albuquerque airport for a 5-hour flight. And there was a book called Better Bidding in 30 Days, a bridge book. And I bought it, and I read it. And that was on Friday. And on Monday, I was ushered into my interview with Ben Bradley, who is exactly like Jason Robards in the famous movie All the President's Men. That's the greatest bit of casting in the history of movies. Hank will talk, but I really love that movie and that performance. And Bradley said to me, my third question in this titanically important job interview, he said, and he really talks like this. He's 90 years old. I love the man. All right, what's the last book you read? Every bone in my body wanted to say David Copperfield, and come on, guys, you would have said David Copperfield, right? I told him the truth. I said, Better Bidding in 30 Days. You play bridge? Yes, sir, I do. You play well? Yes, I'm a life master and a champion. He starts scrawling on a yellow pad, which dates me because you can't get those anymore. Yeah. He frisbees the yellow pad at me, hits me in the gut. I look at the pad, and there's a bridge hand on the pad. This was my wife's hand last night, and I bid 1 club, and do you believe she bid 1 diamond with that hand? And here I fell from grace because I would have bid 1 diamond with that hand too, but I said, no, I think 1 heart would be a better bid. So he goes on for 20 minutes about how he used to fleece the suckers in the dorm at Harvard in the 2 cent a point bridge game, and I got the job. I think he thought he was hiring Fast Eddie. I was 22 years old. I didn't know anything. But I got the job, and I did the job, and in the course of nearly 37 years at the Post, I covered the President of the United States, Congress, professional basketball. We'll talk about that if any of you are interested. Wow, what a year that was. I covered parties, a very big beat in Washington, and then for almost 24 years, my daily column. In addition, I've done radio and television for close to 30 years as a talk show host and a commentator. Author or co-author of 3 books, WashingtonPost.com. Still very active as a columnist, as a consultant now about writing, and my latest is a new bit of contract work for the Washington Post where I am writing obituaries of famous people on contract. These are people who are not successfully dead yet. Jenny liked that phrase. They're not successfully dead yet, and the one I was working on yesterday before I came out here, Mick Jagger. Wish me luck, sir.
Hi, my name is Robert Frederick, class of 95, and my story of taking the next step, I guess, is maybe dominated by a few things. One, I had to take the next step. My parents said, you're not welcome to come back home. 2, the advice of a Quantrill Award-winning History of Western Civ professor, Carl Weintraub, who said, Mr. Frederick, you are so well-rounded, you will roll in any direction I push you. Try something. If you don't like it, try something else. And 3, this sense of having confused for my entire life after hearing that advice, this idea of liking something rather than just being good at it. Because I was good at a lot of things and was really pretty well-rounded, and as a result, didn't really know what I actually liked. So I went straight into the job that was hiring the most in 1995, which was management consulting. I worked for Price Waterhouse. I absolutely hated it, but I can tell you what consulting is. It's mostly, well, we're being recorded, so I won't go into those kinds of details. Basically, deception in some or other way or another. I then went into thinking I was going to change the world. I went into textbook publishing after having a conversation with a publisher about how I thought math textbooks ought to be done. And the conversation turned from, if you would only, to, well, when you start working on this book, and I said, you're offering me a job? I'm a consultant. I've got other things I'm doing. And she said, no, you're going to be a textbook editor. We want you to work on that. That was Houghton Mifflin, McDougall Littell in Boston, where I had followed my best friend, who then later became my spouse, who went off to law school and is now an English professor. So she's also done a few other things. But after that point, I decided that I wasn't going to get anywhere with textbooks, because instead of having a nice NSF-funded University of Montana textbook that was only going to be about 100 pages long and this thick, and when the marketing people got a hold of it, it turned into something that no sixth grader wanted to carry on his backpack anymore. It said, I am going to go try teaching. And since my wife now was an attorney, I could afford to, and I became a high school teacher at the Latin School of Chicago. We moved back to Chicago. At the unfairness of teaching, I decided to try and start a union. Not a good idea if you want to make friends with the administration. And subsequently was told, well, I'm not sure that you can actually teach calculus, AP calculus anymore, unless you've got a master's. And so I didn't have a master's. But I needed to take some time, having focused on these kids for so many years, 3 years as a high school teacher, teaching math and philosophy, the two of my undergraduate AB degrees, that I spent a year as a professional singer, which I had been singing ever since I was a boy singer in the Tulsa Boy Singers, a little traveling choir. The Motec choir, everything else. I had no idea what this whole thing called journalism was, still even at this point. I went back to graduate school and applied mathematics because I saw a shuttle go up and launch, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the world, and I wanted to learn the fluid dynamics behind it. But I also applied as my backup in voice performance and got in both, and each program said you can only do one, choose, and since there can only be really one diva in the room, I went with mathematics. During the first ever all-nighter of my entire academic life, in which I was actually solving matrices by hand, why anyone does that, I don't know, I began to scroll through the Journal of the American Mathematical Society saying, what on earth am I doing here and what am I going to do next? And it sounds like a late-night television commercial, but a tiny little ad changed my life. And it was an ad from the American Association for the Advancement of Science, publishers of Science magazine, founded by Thomas Edison, that said, are you in science and engineering? If so, are you interested in media? Would you like a fellowship to work a summer at a media outlet? I was like, yes, yes, yes. And I had always been fascinated with radio, and so I applied in radio, and it turns out that nobody applies in radio. So I got the gig and spent that next summer at KUNC in Greeley, Colorado, community radio for for Northern Colorado, 90.7 FM. And absolutely loved it. I did pretty well. I got about a CD's worth of clips, including one that went national on NPR. And when Bob Edwards said my name over the air, I was transported back to when I was 8 years old and living in Minnesota. And the first time that I remember my parents had always had the radio on, but it was the first time as an 8-year-old that I was like, actually I listened to what they were listening to and thought, wow, that's pretty cool. That's pretty interesting. And it was just, this huge transfer from, I turned 30 during that fellowship, and boom, now I was back, and I was the first person at that radio station to have a story go nationally. And I decided that I was pretty good at that. But again, so here's the confusion, right? Do I like it or am I good at it? So I started thinking through all of my previous careers and what did I really like about each one? And I liked presentations that I did in Price Waterhouse. I liked the aspect of learning something and then figuring out how to communicate it to somebody else. That was part of textbook editing. I liked, a certain sense of didacticism, which partly is what brought me here to talk to all of you. And finally, in singing, I just, love to use my voice. And so all of that sort of said radio journalism. And I tried it out and found that it's very hard to make a living as a freelance radio journalist. Tuna fish and peanut butter start to look pretty expensive at the grocery store. But eventually I started to learn a second media known as print, and that paid a little bit better. So I got to essentially finance my radio career with my print stories.
Wait, print paid better than
Print
something?
paid better than radio.
There's something
yeah.
wrong with this
Yeah, it's
microphone.
true. Yeah, I was getting 10 cents a word. I'm now getting between $1 and $2 a word for my stories. But 10 cents a word was what I was doing for even places like the Dallas Morning News. And they closed their science section while I was first starting out. But the opportunity came up to work at KWMU in St. Louis. Again, another 90.7 FM kind of place. And we, the fellowship was provided by Monsanto. I tried to ignore that fact and report on them anyway. But I was not beholden to them, so I went after them as well. And rigor, you got to do rigor, that's true. But that meant every Friday and Monday I worked writing print pieces, and Tuesday morning my wife, bless her, woke up at 5 a.m., drove me to the airport, and I had enough funding, was paid $16 an hour, 3 days a week, to work at a radio station. And it lasted a year, and during that year I got to interview the head of several Nobel laureates, several people who had big things, important things to say scientifically. The AAAS happened to have its meeting in St. Louis that year, which is why Monsanto decided local public radio station needed a science reporter to cover that meeting, indeed. And the eventuality happened that also the Australians and the British and everybody else had come to this meeting. And during that time, I guess I made quite an impression with a really nice quote from the head of the Vatican science program, who lost his job basically because of it. But he gave me the quote of Christian fundamentalism is a plague on American society. And boy, that got a lot of play. And that impressed the Australians enough that they gave me a fellowship to attend the World Conference of Science Journalists. And from there, this whole new thing called podcasting was starting up. And Science Magazine was starting a podcast, and had somebody who was doing it who was not a radio person, did not know what he was doing radio-wise. And so I applied to that job from Australia, and that, I think, is what got my resume some attention, that this guy's applying from Australia for this job, which I got, and then tuna fish and peanut butter were no longer expensive. I'm now a freelancer in North Carolina. My wife finished her PhD and is now a professor, so we happily moved away from the DC area to a little bit smaller community, but I'm still writing for all the big mags, and hopefully going to get back into doing some radio. But I consult on pretty much every media, because I also had to learn every other multimedia that there was along the way, including video, because there was only one multimedia journalist for Science Magazine for 4 years, and that was me. So that's my story, and conflated tale, I suppose, but driven by pressures and advice from the past, and including the great words of Carl Weintraub about just trying something. Take that next step. Doesn't matter what it is. It's life. You can't screw up. Thank you.
Well said. Okay, the rest of the program belongs to you. Your questions, please. And if you want to aim questions at any of us individually, please say so. If you want to just lob a question that any of us can field, say that. We're here for you. Who's first? Yes. Please use the mic in the center of the floor.
Hi, I just want to thank you all for coming here today. I was just wondering, to be a science reporter, how necessary do you think it is to have an actual science background, major in it or something like that? Or can you get that kind of job if you have a unrelated major, not really a lot of background in science, but you're just interested in it?
Follow your interest. I don't think you need a degree. That's an ongoing debate among science journalists. Some of the best of them do not have any science degree or background at all. They just need to be curious and to keep asking questions. And if they don't know something, they're going to ask the question. So as Bob mentioned earlier, ask any question, no matter how dumb it is. Often the science degree, in my case, is in math. And so I literally just say, I don't know anything, I studied math, so tell me about your science. And that tends to open them up, and so they're willing to tell me more. I do know people who have degrees in science and actually gets in the way of them doing good science reporting because they think they know something when they really should and just ask a question about it. So, but regarding science in particular, unlike Bob, I think I would be too dour and dark and depressed as a person if I had to do all journalism. I need to be inspired by what my people are doing and not just cover a lot of deviant behavior, which is mostly what most journalism is about.
The mic awaits. Please come on up, and you can make a line if you like, or wait. Okay. Yes, sir.
I actually have two questions. So there's been quite a bit of talk about journalists needing transferable skills, and one of them seems to be programming. That's the one that seems to keep popping up the most. How would you say? What is your personal opinion? Is that an important thing? Learning to program, Java, HTML, or are there other sort of transferable skills that are also quite important to the business?
Anybody want to take? Go
Sure.
ahead, please.
Yeah.
It's crucial to have at least some understanding of programming and working with systems. I was talking about this earlier today. A couple of thoughts on this. One, just to give you a kind of perspective, as a senior editor at a magazine, I typically use 6 or 7 different programs. None of those, I'm not counting Microsoft Word, right? So I use spreadsheets, I use databases, I use Drupal, which is a web content management system. I use Adobe InCopy. All of these, I use Bridge, which is software for managing metadata on photographs. These are all things that I had to learn that I had, no idea was going to come with the package. A couple of suggestions I have just about things that you could do if you feel uncomfortable and nervous about the idea. Like, wait a minute, I wanted to go to journalism because I want to write. That was the whole point, wasn't it? So a couple of thoughts on that. One, get over it. Journalism now involves understanding how the web works. It involves being ready to change and to adapt to new situations. Part of the way you can do that, if you are uncomfortable with the idea of programming at the brass tacks basic level, you should immediately today go to codeyear.com, codeyear.com. They have an amazing program for 2012. You give them your email address and they will email you a weekly lesson. In 52 weeks, they will teach you about programming from the very basic, simple, an idiot can do week 1, to quite advanced stuff involving HTML, and you will learn a ton. I'm doing it myself. It takes about 5 hours a week is what they're telling me. You can also, the University of Chicago, have learned today, has a contract with, is it lynda.com, is this right?
Yeah, it's lynda.com, and it's, university has like 1,000 slots, and you can learn all the Adobe programs, Photoshop, InDesign, all of those online, 3 o'clock in the morning or Sunday afternoon or whatever.
Yeah, it's part of the job now.
Is it a prerequisite to get a job now, to know this programming and program?
I wouldn't call it a prerequisite. What I would say is when I'm looking, I'm not in hiring mode, but when I look at resumes and when people in my profession look at resumes in magazines, yeah, we'd like someone who, it came up when I was interviewed to be hired for the magazine. They said, have you ever worked in InDesign or InCopy? And I said, I don't even know what those are. They overlooked that, thankfully, 7 years ago and gave me a job. But yeah, it's an expectation, and if you don't have those things, the thing to be said is the journalism market is incredibly tough right now, and there are a lot of people out there who do know them. So you're putting yourself at a pointless disadvantage if you don't have familiarity and comfort with working with these programs. And so saying, hey, I know, a reasonable amount about HTML, and I'm at least familiar enough to understand like what's going on what's going on in web design these days, because people are, it's constantly changing. It's a moving target. But that familiarity is going to help you, and it's, interesting stuff to learn.
Just a quick note on that. There's a lot of entry-level jobs in the web
Tons.
So that's another reason why it's handy to have those skills. And it's just more tools in your toolkit.
Anybody else on the panel want to jump? Robert?
Going to add one more website, which is yourhtmlsource.com.
Oh, good. Yeah.
yourhtmlsource.com. It's a set of free lessons. It's provided by Ross Shannon, who I believe programmed the original version of Amazon's website. And I think this is his way of giving back. It's how I learned HTML, and my official title at Science Magazine was web editor, and I got that job just knowing what I learned there. So it gets into HTML and CSS, and a little bit of XML as well. But I don't think you need to know Java or anything like that. My management consulting was management, but it was IT. So Price Waterhouse taught me COBOL. I mean, we're talking ancient history, right? COBOL, and some Fortran and things like that. The only, I think, computer science class at the time at the University of Chicago was Pascal, and you literally hand wrote out your exam at the end, and the professor typed it in and compiled it. And if it ran, you got an A, and if it didn't, you got failed. So I think as a broader brushstroke, the answer to your question is you need to know how things are formatted, whether it's InDesign, Photoshop, whatever it is. If it's web copy, then HTML and XML, a little bit of CSS kind of stuff. Understanding that is good.
You had a second question.
Yeah, my second question is, so I had the good fortune of getting stuck in the train station this summer in China with journalists from the Toronto Star. And we talked about quite a bit, but one thing he did mention was that there's been quite a sort of increasing number of ex-journalists who are moving into the PR field. And I was wondering why that is, and if there are any particular skills that were transferable in both of these industries, and if any of you have had that sort of attraction, but then just sort of didn't take the plunge for whatever reason.
They pay better.
Way better.
When I worked at KWMU in St. Louis, I got basically a job offer without even asking for it to cover their medical school, the WashU's medical school. And they were offering me 3 times what my full salary would have been at the radio station to do nothing more than just what I was doing, but write it with a slant towards promoting WashU. And that was, to put a figure on it, they were offering something like $90,000 a year just to be PR. And how I successfully avoided that temptation was to say, no, I like telling stories that I want to tell. I don't want to tell stories that somebody else wants to tell.
But the transferable skill is that as journalists, we're trained or have learned to get the important stuff up front in a clear, concise, and effective way. What good PR people do is the same thing. When they're sending out press releases, and a badly written press release, and believe me, I've seen hundreds of them, you can wade through, 100 words and have no idea what the event, person, whatever it is. And you're thinking, well, why do I, who get, 150 press releases a day, why in God's name would I want to read this thing? So the transferable skill is clear, concise, and engaging prose. And that's what makes good PR people, and it's what makes good journalists. I think that's...
And one more factor.
I would
Please.
just jump in and say, I think that's transferable skill to anything that you're doing, though. Whether it's PR, whether it's journalism, good writing will get you places in any field. So.
Good writing is good planning, and good planning means that you will always walk all the way around all 360 degrees of the story before you sit at the keys or sit at a microphone. And if that's not a transferable skill, I am a close relative of a monkey. That will work in any business, any time. And journalism has sent people to all sorts of businesses. My colleagues over the years are working in everything from public relations to entrepreneurial business. They use this skill every day.
It's very hard to go back the other way from PR to journalism. There's a sense by the editors that you've sold out, and some of them won't take you back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So earlier, a few of you were talking about ebooks, and I was wondering if you could talk about that and sort of where you see the future of journalism and the publishing industry going.
You
Okay,
got any
well.
other easy ones for us? You got the
Exactly.
rest of the evening?
Well, let me roll up my sleeves here. Ebooks and electronic versions of books. They are definitely going to be a part of our future. They are part of our present, obviously. What we have been finding, that is we in publishing have been finding, is that ebooks and people who like to read on devices are the kinds of people who do volume reading. And so people who love to just tear through mystery novels and romance novels and things of that manner that they just tear through and they want one after another, and they don't want to have to carry around 50 copies of books with them all the time. Those are people who really enjoy having something on an ebook. And so maybe Peter can talk a little bit more to this, since that's a little bit more of a trade publishing thing. For us at the press and those of us who work at university publishers, we are in a little bit of a different world where we're publishing, somebody's take on Wittgenstein. We're publishing scholarly work in philosophy and anthropology and sociology. And these are the kinds of things that these scholars need to have these books. They like to have physical books, we find. They, even though Kindle says, oh, you can write notes, oh, you can flag a page, all that kind of thing, it's not the same thing as taking it off the shelf, seeing that sticky note you put in, and just, oh, here we go, here, flip right to it, I'm there. So for scholarly publishing, we at the University of Chicago Press, we do make an ebook edition for every single book that we publish, so they are out there and they are available, and we don't want to restrict people in their choices, but we find that people prefer to actually have physical books with a lot of our scholarly books. Books that have a more wide appeal, that are more, maybe I keep using this word trade, maybe I should explain it a little bit actually, because when I say trade books, it's meant to mean books that are for a wide audience, that have a wide appeal to many different kinds of people. For example, Stephen King is a trade author, as well as John Krakauer and even Malcolm Gladwell. These are all trade writers, even though they work in different kinds of things. But they have a very wide, broad audience. University press authors are professors who are writing for other professors, so they don't sell as many copies of books. But anyway, back to the ebook thing. So we offer our ebooks, but we find that people still really want to have their regular books. Now, I mentioned earlier I work in reference, and reference books are sort of a different animal because people need to go through them and get specific information in a fairly quick manner, which is why we've been experimenting with other types of platforms, including a web-based platform. I don't know if any of you have known about this or perhaps even used it, maybe through school, but the Chicago Manual of Style is on a website. You need a password to get in, but once you're in, you are able to search by essentially a Google search for all of the stuff that's in our content. There are ways to do bookmarks and notes and personalize the things on the website so that you have your own sort of markers in there. There's a forum so that you can talk to other users of the site and ask questions about commas. And there's also, of course, the Q&A, which has been a very popular feature where our editor, who is from the manuscript editing department and the lead person on the Manual of Style, she answers about 3 or 4 emails from readers every week to sort of weigh in on definitive questions of style and grammar. And we found that that has been a very, very popular thing for people who like to use the Manual of Style. We're also thinking about perhaps changing some of our books into apps. There is one book that we have done that with so far. It was called Gems, and it was by our science editor. She put that book out there. It is a book that is a beautiful hardcover coffee table book in its print form about the gem collection at the Museum of Science and Industry. And it was kind of a cool story, actually. We had to hire extra security and go to the museum at night so that they could take the gems out of their cases and photograph them in 3D so that when you look at this stuff on the app, you can spin the gem around and see it from all angles. And there are things that pop out, so you get little facts and figures about, what diamonds are or quartzite or what have you. And it's a very, very cool, very slick app. But it hasn't been picked up in the way that we thought it would be picked up by users. And we are, we're going to learn from that experience, and we probably will try some other experiments with some other books into bringing them into that arena. But, essentially at our press, and I think for university presses right now, the biggest question is, what format do readers want? What is most convenient and most useful for readers? And some of that will be ebooks on Kindles, and some of that will be other formats, probably some formats we haven't even come across yet. So, Peter?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm very optimistic about ebooks, but to present the problem, because you're going to read articles saying publishing's dying because of ebooks, it seems to be a really popular source of topic for journalists. But the problem is a couplefold. Like, one is just for my sensibility, I love producing a thing, a book, and I love everything that goes into it, from choosing the paper to the cover to the, the format. And you obviously lose that, and you lose that kind of tactile experience with the book. But the real problem is from a commercial publishing point of view, we make a lot of money, most of our money actually off of our backlist books. Is that slow burn of just To Kill a Mockingbird and Brave New World. But we make our big money off of hardcover books, and that's because we charge $26.99, we charge $35 for that book. When an ebook is on sale at the same time, it's $14. And so you're losing, you could be losing $15 worth of profit. And it used to be that the hardcover was out and people would just be forced to buy that, and then they would wait a year and buy the paperback, which is priced pretty much the same as the ebook is. So there's a real danger that people are going to just go to the ebook, and we'll lose huge margins off of that. Now, what we're finding is that ebooks are exploding, and I think people are buying more books off of these readers they're getting, and we're just seeing a huge spike after Christmas, because one of the most popular gifts was to get an iPad or a Kindle or something like that. So this book I talked about, which is just out, American Sniper, I'm seeing double ebooks versus physical books. So at Kindle, it sold 2,000 or 2,500 one day, and we sold 1,400 physical books. And we're able to do really interesting things with the ebooks now. So for this book, we did what's called an enhanced ebook, where you really take advantage of everything that's cool about an iPad. So we can embed videos in it. We could do pop-up, definitions or new photos or audio. So I'm really optimistic that people, that first of all, there's going to be a lot of creative things we can do with that format, and that's something that we haven't explored and we're just, learning about now. And we don't know where the technology is going to go. We're at a stage now where we have an iPad, but who knows what the next step is? And it's kind of exciting for publishing to be a part of that and not be, thought of as a dinosaur, to be sort of participating in that change. And we're seeing that people are still buying books and reading books in huge numbers off of the readers. And so clearly people are embracing the book as an idea, if not a book as a physical object. So I think there's a lot of reasons for optimism.
Yeah, and just to add one more thing, ebooks aren't free. It doesn't cost us no money to make ebooks, which I know was said, around by some media outlets for a while there, and there was the whole price debate about Amazon and that kind of a thing. So when Peter's talking about, the ebook is out there for $15 and the hardcover is, $20 or $30,
Right.
there are reasons for these prices. They're not arbitrary, and there's actually a lot of work that goes into these ebooks, and there are. I think that one of the other things that we will see with the future of ebooks, and Peter
Yeah.
maybe agrees with me, is that as the pricing works itself out, as people come to agreements on what an ebook really is worth in terms of how much it costs to produce and how much it should cost to the reader, that will probably have some determination as well.
And just quickly, when she says there's costs involved,
Yeah.
all the costs that go into creating a book, from getting a copy edited to acquiring the rights, and that's what I do mainly, is acquire rights to books. So I see a proposal and I think it'll sell, and I buy it, and then we produce the book. But the whole production cost for a book, for copy editing, proofreading, and getting a design, is still there for the book, and it's a lot. And there's one other thing I wanted to say, I can't remember. But, there's also efficiencies with it. So right now, when we ship a book to Barnes & Noble, that book can come back to us. And so I could print 50,000 copies and get 25,000 copies back, and that's sunk cost for me. We lose all the costs for printing, binding, and shipping that book. Well, with an ebook, they never come back, so it's a much more efficient channel of distribution and a healthier business model. So.
You had the good grace to ask about where daily journalism was going. Let me share only a couple of my 5,300,000 thoughts about that issue. First and foremost, for all of you, there is journalism and there will be journalism. Do not make any mistake about that. What we are living through is an earthquake in the business of journalism. That does not mean that there will never again be a market for deeply reported, carefully told journalism. I think on the contrary. And your generation is going to solve this problem. This is the most compelling, difficult business problem I have ever seen. And yet it will lead to a golden age of journalism. I'm absolutely sure of it for these reasons. We have a world and a country that is more educated than ever. We have more of a need for accurate information than ever, and we have more of a need for deeper storytelling than ever. So how does Twitter solve that problem? It does not. What will solve it is the kind of journalism that the people in this room can produce. Now, how can you make a living in this business? That is not the right question. The right question is, how can you prepare yourselves to do this work? And that's what I was hoping to allude to before. Attack your weaknesses, practice, 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 and get comfortable with yourselves as reporters. Challenge yourselves to go into situations about which you know absolutely nothing. If all of you in this room want to be rock music critics, I would say to you that that's too easy. Sure, be rock music critics, but challenge yourselves to be critics of art at the same time, or on alternate Tuesdays. Try things you haven't tried. Push yourselves. Push yourselves to get better, and you will get better. Now, what is going to happen in this landscape? I have absolutely no idea in the short run, but here is Bob's free guess in the long run. That all of the high-intensity, high brand visibility newspapers and television networks that you know and have known all your lives are soon going to be folded into, in some form of partnership, the big traffic websites like Yahoo and Google and Facebook. It is inevitable. The Washington Post that kept my children in diapers forever, it cannot stand alone anymore. The business does not work. The advertising dollars have run away somewhere. So therefore, the journalism is not as deep and not as good as it used to be. It can be again if there is enough of a host that provides the economic cover. I think that is where we're going, and we're going to see the kind of journalism that lit up the world in the time since World War II. It's a thrilling business. It will always be a thrilling business, but it's a transaction. And it requires a reader and a viewer who are going to meet you in the middle to consume the kind of journalism that you want to do. I know that you in this room want to do that kind of journalism. Just keep getting out of bed for the next couple of years, and this whole business arrangement is going to reshape so that you can do it as a career.
I mean, what's interesting, I'd love to hear your thoughts, is there's the business of journalism has hit a rough patch, but what is interesting is that what's fueling the internet is content of all sorts and really poaching off of journalism. But you know what? It's content of all kinds, from blogs to...
Well, it is, and one question for all of the people in this room to ask, which is being asked in newsrooms all over the world, is it really true that anybody is a journalist today? Anybody with a laptop is a journalist? Anybody with a cell phone that can take a picture is a journalist? I don't think so. But there are huge numbers of people
But
out
I
there
think
who disagree
starting
with
out,
that.
I think that doing a blog or doing something online is a really great way for you to get out there and, to use a hackneyed expression, spread your wings, get noticed too. And, it's not always the case that it's true, but if you're good and you have interesting articles, you're going to get noticed, and who knows where that leads. It could lead back to a traditional journalist job, but it could mean that you just have a highly successful blog, and there are those, and those lead to interesting things.
Right.
So,
Next question. Who's next? We got about 10 minutes left. Please use the mic, because we're being immortalized here.
Hello.
Hello.
My question is actually about blogs, and how, well, you just said it was really important. So, do you have any suggestions or tips? Because there's so many. I feel like there's nothing. How are you going to come up with something new that's not Kim Jong-il looking at things?
right. I have no tips other than you just never know what's going to work. You never know until you do it, and until
Who knew about
Yeah.
ICANN has cheeseburger?
Right.
I mean,
right.
what?
Here's a tip if your goal is to get into something more like journalism, is that a blog is not a diary. And a good blog engages in a subject matter, and one of the ways that you do that is you show in the writing you do and in linking on your blog, you show that you're reading around. And one of the funny things that happens is if you start linking to other people's work and then you let them know that you're doing that, so you pop a little email to the person at another blog and you say, hey, I'm just to give you a heads up, I'm linking to your story. This is a useful way to start that dreaded word, networking. But the distinction between a blog and a diary is something that is an expression of your private inner self, which, more power to you, great. But if you want to get read on a regular basis, either your private confessional self has to be compelling, and I find that a little creepy. Well, there are people who've made a wonderful living, writing about their incredibly sordid social lives, but I don't find that compelling, but apparently people do. But if you write engagingly and connect to a larger world of other people writing and thinking about things, and that subject matter can be anything. If you are fascinated by, plant biology, by all means, go to it. If you find fashion compelling, I was at lunch today telling people the fields in which you will not get a full-time job as a journalist are film. You won't be a film critic. You won't be a full-time film critic. You won't be a full-time music critic. You won't be a full-time fashion writer. And there was another one.
Television.
And television. Yeah, you won't.
Education.
Right, right, right. And the Department of Education. Oh, I'm having my Perry moment. Those jobs aren't out there. They just aren't. I mean, speaking as somebody who held one of those jobs, they are going away. A lot more of that work is getting spread out to freelancers. But if you write compellingly on several subjects, 3 or 4 subjects, you can put together a really interesting blog. And if you're reaching out to people, you will find that that network of people reading you grows. And as that happens, that's how you get seen. Just telling your friends and your family that you're writing a blog and mentioning it on Facebook isn't magically going to get you read by somebody who can give you paid work. But the people who can do that are the people who are also writing about that on the web. That'd be my thought.
All right, can I hop in here before you run out of ink there? Because I made my life as a commentator, and it was very similar to blogging, I think, in some ways.
Yeah.
But there are three elements that I would always insert into any conversation like this. One is that a blogger has got to be a reporter. Got to be. Otherwise, you're just baying at the moon. Second, you got to have an editor who is with you all the way. This, of course, is my big complaint about web journalism in general, is that it hops over that entire layer of protection and help that editors can give you. Third, less is more. Don't feel compelled to fill up the endless space on the internet just because you can. The toughest thing I ever had to do as a newspaper columnist was to work on a column for 2 hours and come to that moment and say, you know what? Ball it up in a figurative ball and throw it in the figurative wastebasket. This isn't working. You have to have the courage to do that, and that'll sustain the quality that you want to achieve.
To the quality, again, to emphasize what was made earlier and my own sort of take on this, you have to write about something that you like and enjoy yourself. Don't do it to make money, as was said earlier too. You do it because you really want to write about that. There's this idea of that there isn't any new story out there, and we've all had this idea that there are, heard that there are 10 stories in the world, and one of them is Romeo and Juliet, and it just gets remade however many times, right? If you can write a better Romeo and Juliet than Shakespeare, then write it, right? If you can cover plant biology better than the best plant biologist blogger or reporter out there, then write about plant biology, but only do it if you're really interested in it.
Thank you.
Thank
Sure.
you.
Thank
Who's
you.
next? About 5 minutes left. About 3 minutes left. Here she comes.
Hi, I have a question about the ethics of investigative journalism,
Sure.
especially after the News of the World hacking scandal in the UK, which I was fortunate or unfortunate enough to be close to. How do you know how far you should go to get a good story?
Shall I start? I was lucky enough to work for news organizations my entire career that answered that question with a code of ethics that was distributed to every employee. There was no guessing ever. Here is how you handle unnamed sources. Here is how you handle background information. Here is how you handle personal conflicts, such as investments that you may have in an industry that's directly related to a beat that you cover and that sort of thing. There's no mystery here. The mystery comes when people try to slide along the edges of these policies into murky land where it isn't in the code of ethics and where perhaps it's never come up before. The best advice I can give you is not to dive into the lake until you've tested it for alligators, and that means going and asking. Don't assume. Great advice for any journalist in any area, but go and ask an editor whether it's okay. One story for you. Back in the 70s, I worked on a long series of investigative stories about the drug traffic on the streets of Washington, D.C. And in order to get that story, I had to get on the record interviews with a lot of people who therefore would have been implicated. And was it ethical to publish their names? Well, there was nothing in the code of ethics about that exactly. There are lots of sources for lots of kinds of stories, and my editor and I had to, on the fly, with nothing to guide us except our heads and our hearts, make a decision about that. And we decided not to publish those names for the same general reason that newspapers will often withhold the names of rape victims or withhold the names of children who are accused of crimes. The larger bad does not justify the smaller, quicker good. So that's the kind of ethical decision that gets made all the time. But it's going to depend on what kind of a human being you are many times.
That's that's the useful advice. One of the things I always sort of put out there is there is a kind of intuitive does it sound, if you describe what you've done, dicey? If it does, if you got a tech expert to hack into somebody's, phone voicemail account, as I say that, it should sound dicey to you, right? I mean, if it doesn't, then we have a larger problem with ethics and the teaching of ethics at the University of Chicago. You should know that that sounds dicey. If you're asking that kind of question about the journalism you do, does this sound dicey as I describe my practice, then this is something we have to interrogate. Good examples of things that, and I'm sure Bob would agree, like we have a standing practice if we're writing a story about someone and they are reasonably available and the story, has claims about them, they are given the opportunity to respond if at all possible, right? So if somebody comes in with a story, I mean, we don't do a lot of, sort of newsy and political journalism, but when we do, if somebody says, God, that alderman, he's involved in the drug trade. Well, first of all, the lawyer who vets all our copy is going to say, that's an accusation that we can get sued. But the second thing is, even if, we do one of those careful dance arounds, our source says this thing, and it's all carefully in quotes, there is a reasonable expectation that when you say things about someone and they seem defamatory, they ought to be given some kind of opportunity to respond. That may not always seem like an immediately obvious piece of ethics, but if you think about it for a minute, you kind of get there.
Okay, everybody, thank you very much. And before I call up Kathy Anderson for a final word, I want to give her a figurative hug, because if you folks do not take advantage of this terrific woman, you're also a close relative of a monkey. Chicago Careers in Journalism is Kathy. It is one of the best things I know going on any campus, particularly on this campus, and you should all take advantage. Kathy.
Thanks, Bob. I just wanted to note that CCIJ is certainly for those who want to go in the field of journalism, but it's also for those who want just journalism as an extracurricular activity on campus. And so it's easy to make an appointment with me. Just let me know. I've got cards, whatever I can do to help. Thank you very much.
Oh, we're all up here if you want to come and besiege us with other questions that we didn't have time for. Thanks, everybody.